Welcome to the Behind Blizzard's Worlds panel.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Behind Blizzard's Worlds. I'm Gerald, I'm your moderator today, and I'm joined today by three amazing panelists who have some stories to tell you. We've got Alan Adham, co-founder of Blizzard Entertainment, Ben Thompson, art director on Hearthstone, and Jeff Kaplan, game director on Overwatch. Now, that's right. I'm super excited about this panel because I'm actually surprised we're doing this. We're taking you behind the scenes on some of the processes, some of the things that happened in the early days of Blizzard and with some of the games that you're seeing here today and playing. Now, Alan, I'd like to kick it off with you if you don't mind.
Sure.
So take us back to the early days, before we were Blizzard Entertainment, when we were Silicon and Synapse. What were those early days like? What was like the culture like? What inspired us?
Yeah, even just hearing the name Silicon and Synapse makes me chuckle. We, Mike and Frank and I and a few other friends from UCLA, we had started the company and we thought, Silicon and Synapse, what a genius name. The building block of computers merged with the building block of the human mind. And then, of course, we realized pretty quickly that no one knew what it meant, and nobody could spell it, and we'd made a horrible mistake. It took us a few years to change the name to Chaos Studios, which is a cool story in and of itself. We chose Chaos because it so perfectly embodies our development process. And when people ask us what's the secret to Blizzard's success, it's that we embrace the sort of chaos of creation. Now, it's controlled chaos, so it's not totally chaotic. But about 6 months after picking Chaos Studios as our name, there's a company out there called Chaos Music that served us an injunction. So we said, we better change our name. And then we changed to Blizzard Entertainment, the name that you kind of know us as today, which, if you think about what a blizzard is, it's similar. It's this powerful, uncontrolled force of nature, but in its wake, you leave kind of beauty. And so all of that was sort of encapsulating how we make games, which is we like to leave ourselves early on enough room to ideate, to make mistakes. And in fact, we make a lot of mistakes when we're trying to make these games. And I think you're going to hear about some of the fun behind-the-scenes stories and the many, many mistakes that we make, some small designs, some very large, the products that we spent many years working on that never shipped. But
now here's something. Yeah. If you'll take a look behind us, we've got some really cool images that we're sharing with you today. A lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that you've never seen before. Lots of stuff that has been dug out from the vault and even from Jeff's own hard drives, if I recall.
That's right.
You've seen Nomad up there on the screen.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
Yeah, so Nomad, we've talked about it a little bit. I don't know how many people really know what Nomad is, but Nomad was the predecessor to World of Warcraft. And so we started Nomad up. It was our attempt to split into two teams right after StarCraft. And so we started up a second team, and Nomad was going to be this sort of alternate reality sci-fi. If you think of games like Dune or stories like Dune, or maybe the heavy metal cartoons, that was sort of the graphical inspiration, or Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings animated cartoons. That's what we were targeting. And after about a year of working on Nomad, we realized we hadn't quite found, the magic. That plus we were all playing EverQuest pretty much every minute of every day, and we're distracted by our many hours in EverQuest. Little known secret, Blizzard was a big part of a high-level guild called Legacy of Steel, which is in fact how I met Jeff Kaplan.
Is that really how you met?
It is.
Yeah.
The very first time, my very first memory of Jeff was online. I was applying to join the guild as a tank. I played an ogre tank, and we'd gone into this crazy dungeon, and as an ogre, I'd managed to get myself locked behind a door, and I couldn't get myself out. So I was stuck in the depths of this dungeon. And in EverQuest, if you died, your gear dropped there, and you were in big trouble. And so Jeff gave me this teleportation potion that was probably worth about 1,000 gold. That was just spectacularly expensive if you know how much EverQuest was. And he didn't even know who I was. And so I guess the moral of that story is be nice to the people you meet online, because you never know who they are.
It paid off.
It paid off big time.
It was worth the
for both
gold.
of us.
Yeah.
Jeff, what was it about Alan that made you want to stick your neck out for him, or at least provide some of your hard-earned loot for him?
Well, in a hardcore Uber raiding guild, you did anything for anybody. So I didn't really know Alan that well at the time, but here was this guy who was our responsibility as one of the raid leaders. You helped everybody out. We were all in it together. So it didn't matter who Alan was. I didn't know it was Alan Adham, founder of Blizzard Entertainment. He was our warrior that needed to be helped out of the dungeon at that moment.
Yeah, you're always hearing about how like raiding guilds and like these raid groups, like that's a real good simulation for what it's like to run a business and for like how to get people working together and collaborating. And it looks like that culture kind of carried over into what became Blizzard.
It did, and in fact, we recruit from the guilds and the games that we play. And so Jeff Kaplan, Ian Hazakostas, Alex Afrasiabi, they all came from guilds. There are others that we've tried to recruit over the years, and the conversations are quite funny. Usually it takes something like 10 or 15 emails and contacts for people to believe who we are. And so, if some random guy you've been playing with says, hey, I work at Blizzard Entertainment, we'd like to talk to you about a job.
Well, who's going to believe that, right?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But if you think about what it takes to run a high-level guild, the passion, the initiative, the leadership skills, it's almost a perfect sort of cauldron for testing out the sorts of personalities that will be successful later making games and running teams.
Well, speaking of guilds, do we have anyone here who plays World of Warcraft? Anybody? Why don't we show you some really cool behind-the-scenes World of Warcraft stuff from some older looks.
Early days.
The early days of World of Warcraft. I'd like to talk about Warcraft as a setting and where that began, because really, World of Warcraft and Warcraft means so much to what Blizzard means to the community. Like, where was that first Warcraft moment? When did that happen?
Yeah, so we'd grown up playing D&D, Warhammer, Lord of the Rings. We're all big fantasy and sci-fi kind of inner geeks. And every time we looked at a game, our first reaction was to think, how could we add orcs and battle axes, make it better? Literally, we would talk about, let's do a hockey game and add battle axes and orcs. We had a goofy name for a hockey game called Blood and Ice.
Wow.
I would still play that. Can we make that?
Yeah, maybe one day, not too late. One of many ideas that never saw the light of day. But we were playing this RTS game called Dune 2, and it was one of the first real-time strategy games made by Westwood Studios. And it was amazing. And so we immediately took inspiration from that, said, hey, let's do the high fantasy version of that game. Samwise came up with the name Warcraft. We were all sitting around in our shorts and socks eating Burger King one day at lunch, right. And I think Samwise said, the way Sammy says, Warcraft. And out of that was the beginnings of what now, 20 years later, has become, this grand franchise. So that's really kind of the inception of Warcraft.
Wow. What was your Warcraft experience like, Jeff, your first one?
Well, mine was kind of fascinating because I was previously more of a fan of first-person shooters. Mm-hmm. So all of the id games like Quake and Doom, and that's what I was really following. Fell in love with EverQuest. Met Alan and Rob Pardo, and Rob was the lead designer on Warcraft 3, and they were having me come down to Irvine and hang out with them, and eventually I got hired on as a quest designer on World of Warcraft, but that was in 2002 of May, and Warcraft 3 shipped in 2000, actually in July of 2002, like a couple months later, so they just all hands on deck put everybody on Warcraft. And I fell in love with Warcraft 3. I mean, to this day, I think Warcraft 3 is one of the greatest games Blizzard has ever made. And I was literally...
You agree with that?
Warcraft... I mean, it was amazing. And, Dota spawned out of it. But, like, the storytelling and the cinematics and the way the units moved and the game design, like, every part of Warcraft 3 was brilliant. And I literally was just a fly on the wall. I don't think I contributed as much as a fly on the wall to being, somehow they put me in the Warcraft 3 credits. I think it just says additional testing is what but I didn't even deserve that credit. But I was so lucky to just be as engrossed as possible in Warcraft at that moment. And then we were ramping up on World of Warcraft, and listening to Chris Metzen and Bill Petras really talk about what this world was going to be like as we're releasing Warcraft 3, it was magical for me.
See, you're way too humble, because everyone here at Blizzard really collaborates on all these projects. It is about all the voices, every voice matters, everyone working together on everything here. And I'm thinking about like what that process is like. Like whenever we come up with an idea for a game, who are the voices that are chiming in? How is it that we're getting opinions and deciding on whether it's an idea that's going to stick or not? Ben, maybe you could speak to this.
Certainly on the Hearthstone team from day one in its early days, it was very much about a small team environment. Everybody's a generalist. Like
How small was
everybody
the
on the
team?
team. Oh, at the time, I mean, so I joined a number of years back, and I think I'm going to get the number wrong. I'm going to be corrected as soon as I step off this stage. But I was probably around number 6 or 7.
Wow.
So ish, give or take 1 or 2 or 3 in any direction. But the key to that was as soon as the real story comes in, within 6 weeks of joining, the team was basically disbanded. And it was, and I know it's kind of a weird like timeline that happens is I joined as the first artist for the team and was asked to come up with a style for this, cool collectible card game based in the world of Warcraft. And then 6 weeks later, it's, hey guys, StarCraft 2 needs a real push. We got to help get them out the door and get them the resources they need. At the same time, BattleNet needs similar because you don't have one without the other. We need to kind of borrow a lot of these resources that you
all
guys
hands.
have. That's it. So it really left 4 of us at the time in a room to carry the torch for Hearthstone for what ended up being just over a year. It was a year and some months, close on a year and a half. And during that year and a half, a number of the people on the team, especially the 4 of us, would say that was when Hearthstone really got kind of, I won't say solidified. We didn't really decide a lot of major decisions there, but we started to frame the kind of decisions we wanted to make. We started to really discuss, like, what are the important things that this game needs to be? What are the things we would like to see it be going forward? What are the, is it just a collectible card game, or is it something more? Is there, like, what kind of cues are we going to take from existing card game type of play, and what are the things that we're going to hopefully invent for the first time and really bring to this genre? And that makes for a long year and a half. And really during that time, we also had to talk about, like, how are we going to keep that team invested? And that's a really important part, is that because it's about sharing that experience and putting people, the rest of your team in a position where they feel like they're contributing and really offering a lot, and are. We met weekly. We kept our weekly stand-up meetings. They would all come up. We would share with them what we'd been doing for the week previous, get them really excited about those ideas. They would shoot those down. We would shoot some of those down before we ever got to show them, because let me tell you, we're good at coming up with really bad ideas. Certainly when there's only 4 of you in a room. We can talk about some of those. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what it meant was when we all reconvened in about a year and a half's time, people felt like they knew where we were headed, and they knew what we wanted to do. And we were able to kind of get the gears turning in a much less of the time than it would be from reforming a team from scratch.
You bring up bad ideas that never saw the light of day. And, this is not the kind of stuff that we normally like to talk about, because there's so much exciting, cool stuff to talk about. But now that we have you here, who wants to hear about some of the stuff that never saw the light of day?
Yeah. Me.
So, we mentioned Nomad earlier. The first World of Warcraft is nothing like what we see today, right? That first version of World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
What were those original ideas and concepts that you guys were tooling with that maybe never made it into the game or inspired future ideas on other games?
Well, you see some of the pictures in the background behind us, but the user interface, I think, was very different when we first started. The inventory items were probably about 4 times the size of what you see on the screen. The bags were huge. There were really a great many different elements that changed over time. And the zone design, we had no idea what made for fun zones. And so we would play EverQuest and timeout zones, go back and forth between what felt good as players, what felt good in the world. And we call them gray box everything, so that we had a sense of sort of time and space. And then as we started to artify the world, we never wanted people to be confused about what was real art and what was placeholder.
Okay.
So we had our producer's name was Shane. And so we had a picture of Shane's face, and we would put these big Shane cubes in the world. We would skin everything with Shane cubes. So I think Jeff has a pretty funny story about Yeah, one of his experiences with the Shane Cube.
So the Shane Cube would happen anytime either we didn't have a texture for something or something was broken. And we had rolled into the beta at the time. And the beta, we had a function in the beta where players could type /bug and then type in like their different comments. And we had pushed out one patch in the beta where we got every helmet and hat broken in the entire game. So when all the players logged in from one patch to the next, every single player in World of Warcraft had Shane Cube on his head. And then I was reading the bug reports, and one of them just said, "How come there's a drunk guy on my head?" And that was the best way I saw it described, and poor Shane was not drunk, I swear to God, in the picture.
Wow. Hearing about this stuff behind the scenes, there couldn't have been a way to anticipate what World of Warcraft would have begun.
No.
Maybe talk about like that first launch experience. We got a lot of people into the game. We couldn't possibly have predicted the reaction to it, and where that took us as far as like these are decisions we made. Did we make the right decision? What were you thinking internally when that first launch period happened?
Well, launch was insane for World of Warcraft. Who was around for launch of WoW? It was, thank you so much. Thank you guys for being a part of it. I remember you think you're super smart when you're making these decisions. And I remember the team, and we had all these war rooms, and we were talking about the servers and how many PvP servers and PvE servers and role play servers we were going to have. And we thought we were so brilliant that we were going to have, X number of servers for launch. And then as the game grew over time, we would release more servers. So we were keeping like 20% of our servers offline, ready to fill up as the other servers went live. And then we put the game live. We sell the game live for the first time. It was, I think, November 23rd was the date, 2004. And we put the service live, and every single server filled up. And I remember, I'm not a server programmer or a live ops guy or anything like that. I was just kind of the annoying game designer on the side. I remember walking into like the server guys and saying, "Yeah, so those like servers in reserve that we had? They're like, they're all live. Everything's live, and it's going to take 2 months to get more servers. Like, we've ordered the hardware, and we've got to make it through 2 months." And everything was full at that point. So literally, we didn't know what we were doing when that happened. And it was like a weird victim of your own success moment. We ran into weird, there was a couple weird stories related to that. So Blizzard employees, when we release a Blizzard game, Blizzard employees all get copies of the game. Like you get, a standard edition and a collector's edition. World of Warcraft was so popular that they rerouted the truck. We were doing a signing at Fry's here in Orange County in Fountain Valley, and they rerouted the truck that was supposed to be the Blizzard employee copies, and they needed them to sell because the game was selling out so fast. So a bunch of Blizzard employees didn't get their copies of World of Warcraft. And then within a couple weeks of us filling up the servers, we actually just stopped selling the game altogether. We wouldn't send any more copies out because the servers were so full. So it was a very strange problem. I think we've evolved greatly since then. We've really learned how to run a game as a live service. But I would describe the first year of World of Warcraft as pure panic. And it wasn't until the first Blizzcon, which was, I think it was October or November of 2005, we thought everybody hated us and nobody was going to show up. And that first BlizzCon, like, everybody was just so nice to us. They're like, "Yeah, we love WoW, and it's awesome, and we're so glad to be a part of it." And I think that was the first time we actually had a breather as a team, like, okay, maybe we didn't screw up as hard as we thought we did.
That's awesome. Alan, you were actually the first design director on World of Warcraft, is that correct?
Yeah, we didn't call it game direction back then, but for the first 4.25 years or so, I was the game director of World of Warcraft. I think it's commonly known. I left to take a break. I had sort of exhausted myself running the company and game directing World of Warcraft, building that team all at the same time. What I should have done was taken a 1-year sabbatical and come back. I went off and I did some other things for a while. But
let's welcome Alan back, by the way, guys.
Been a little over a year now, so it's amazing to be back. Super, super fun. And Yeah, I left in, I think, February 2004. And then the game shipped November 2004, and Rob Pardo stepped in and took the product live and did an amazing job with folks like Jeff. It was magical. Like building the team from, we started with about 10 after Nomad, and building it to around 50 or so when I left. I think it shipped with close to 60. We all knew exactly what we wanted to make, and it was a very elegant process. It's not always quite that easy, but this one was pretty smooth. And so to imagine today making an MMO with 50 or 60 people in 5 years, almost impossible to conceive that would even happen. And a game as good as World of Warcraft as we all know it to be today. So it was quite a fun ride.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Nomad again. Development for World of Warcraft came immediately afterwards. Was that the timeline chronologically?
Yeah, literally the team and I sat down and we kind of ideated. It took literally one day. I think even by lunchtime, we went out to lunch and said, okay, instead of doing that, let's do this. Let's go back. Warcraft had a chance to kind of breathe in our minds. We were ready to revisit that IP. And the thing about high fantasy is so many people have this common shared kind of folklore of dragons and orcs and what it means to be a mage. It makes it very easy, not just for fans to look at it and understand what it is, but for us as developers and as a team, sometimes if you try to do something that's too different, even us on the team, we're pulling in different directions, and that can be kind of problematic to aligning vision. But high fantasy is one of those things we all kind of know and love. You still bring your own kind of spin on it. We still put our own twist on it, but it was very easy for people to understand what that game would be if you just said, let's take Warcraft and let's make our version of a polished MMO, and let's go own that category.
Now, clearly, you guys had a lot of different ideas for what would make a good MMO. You were all big MMO players. What ideas did you have originally that were like, you know what, this isn't going to work out. This isn't something we could include in the game?
So I'll give you a couple, actually, that when we started talking about them, the entire team thought they were the stupidest ideas that they had ever heard. And so one was the idea of a real-time clock. And so that time would equal time. And if time is time, then calendar is calendar. Mm-hmm. And so, but the idea that if you wanted to see a sunrise in the world of Azeroth, you'd have to be up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And if it was nighttime, well, it would be nighttime in the world. And so the overarching kind of theme there was we didn't just want to make a video game. We wanted to build a virtual world. And your sense of sort of world is tied, or your sense of reality is tied to your sense of time. And so those early conversations were, that's the stupidest idea in the world. You're saying if I work all day and I come home at 7 at night, I will only ever see the world at night. Yes, you will only ever see the world at night. And people immediately, even on team, assumed, well, that meant it would be dark and impossible to play. And until we actually started doing the art, and they saw that what we meant by night wasn't that it would be dark and hard to play, but it would just look beautiful, but at night, but be equally playable. Then one by one, people started to walk into my office and say, it started like this. I don't hate it as much as I thought I was going to hate it. And then stories like, my baby was up at 5 in the morning, and I had her on my lap, and I was fishing off the coast of Westfall, and I watched the sunrise, and it was gorgeous, and things like that. And one by one, people came around to the idea that this real-time clock would make our world feel substantially more real. That was a pretty big one. The other one was the hard faction versus horde split, which we all know today and love, and people strongly identify. And so the psychology behind that was we played a lot of MMOs before, and they were mostly free-for-all. And it meant that everybody could group with everybody, but it also kind of meant you were also kind of competing with everybody else. And so we had this idea that by splitting factions, Horde versus Alliance, you would have a common enemy. And as humans, especially when you're playing a video game, sometimes you want to be cool and socialize with your friends, but sometimes you just want to go out and PvP, and be wicked. And that's the joy of being able to play video games, is doing all this great, being good and being bad. And so it was people on the team saying that is just the worst idea in the world. You're saying if my friends, people were thinking of EverQuest or other MMOs, if my friends played a different race, I would never be able to play with them. And of course the answer was no, because you and your friends will sync up and you'll be on the same horde or alliance, you'll choose the same faction. And again, that was one of the things that I think was pretty definitive, pretty major difference between us and the other MMOs out there, that the benefits of that weren't obvious at first. Today, everybody understands how sort of central to the lore of the world that is, and to the social fabric of the world, because it makes you want to be cool with even people who are just strangers, but on your alliance, you want to be cool with them because you know one day you'll be fighting a common enemy together. And so it made for a better social system.
So we as a studio are also kind of fighting a common enemy, and that's like boredom, right? We want to entertain people, get people excited about playing these games. I'd like to transition, if you don't mind, to some early looks at Overwatch, if that's okay. Anyone here play Overwatch? And the reason why is because we're talking about this collaborative culture. We're listening to each other, bouncing ideas off each other, trying to find out what sticks. Could you maybe take us behind some of those early Overwatch iterations, what we were looking at and what you were thinking with some design ideas behind it?
Yeah, the cool part about Overwatch is we had a very focused core combat that we knew we wanted to have actually we didn't know we wanted it to be 6-person, but we knew we wanted it to be a team-based action shooter featuring these epic over-the-top heroes in global locations. That was kind of the core of what Overwatch was to be. The interesting journey was all of the decisions along the way. The core concept or the vision was always pretty solid, and I think the team always understood what it was. But it was things like, I almost leapt to like, oh, of course it was a 6v6 shooter, but I'm remembering back looking at some of these early pictures, we really struggled to like find what was the right number. We tried 4v4. If we have any Halo fans, they'll know like there are a lot of Halo or Destiny PvP is like 4v4. And we tried larger sizes also. We tried 8v8 and 10v10. And part of like one of the things that we were really struggling with in those early decisions was feeling like the combat, like you mattered in a group, but you didn't matter so much that if you had like one bad shot or one bad moment, you would throw it off for your entire team. And that's just one example of like the hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of decisions that you have to make along the way. Arnold and I were out here earlier in the archives panel talking about finding the boundaries for a new universe and knowing what was acceptable. And somehow, like we knew as a team, that talking scientists from the moon is definitely acceptable, but like the cat in the jetpack is like too ridiculous to be a part of Overwatch.
No way.
I know. I have a feeling it's going to end up in the game now. Like there's no escaping jetpack cat at this point. But and it's weird because I think a lot of times people want this definitive, like stone tablets, like we know exactly every decision that should be made and exactly what the game is or isn't at any one time. But the fun part about making games is there's this creative, collective collaboration that everybody's a part of and everybody's influencing, and it helps you set like a moral compass for the team and like a guideline for the team of like what should be in or what should be out. What are we willing to accept or what are we not willing to accept? And the whole time you're thinking, even though we're a small group, you have to multiply yourself out and think, if there's one of us who really hates this particular thing, how many hundreds or thousands or millions of people might that person be representing right now? So they have to have a strong voice. We have to let them speak up, and we have to understand why they feel that way about the game. So it's very collaborative and representative type of approach to making a game.
It has to get heated sometimes, though, right?
What's that?
Does it get heated sometimes?
Oh, it gets super. I mean, well, Alan was talking about the Horde Alliance split, and we used to have lunches where it was Alan, Bob Fitch, who's a programmer who's been at the company for years, and Rob Pardo. So Rob and Alan were both, lead designers at one point on World of Warcraft. And I remember one lunch literally ending in yelling over whether Horde or Alliance was a good idea. It kind of ended like, fine, like doors slamming, and and what was weird is by the next lunch, nobody ever talked about it again. And what was interesting is Alan was the original visionary for Horde and Alliance, that was to be a thing. And even though initially Rob disagreed with it, Rob was the champion who ultimately made it work as a game system. So like having Horde and Alliance implemented and all the PvP rules and splitting out the world. So even when you're sometimes, a leader and opposed to an idea, the way that the game making process works is so collaborative that sometimes you end up championing a thing that you just didn't agree with at one point.
Yeah, not every decision goes your way. If you're part of a collaborative team, you don't win them all. But that's part of the strength of being on a collaborative team, is recognizing that you're not always going to be right.
Now try making a small collectible card game where Horde and Alliance isn't a thing at all.
Yeah.
Then see what kind of arguments ensue.
So back to the whole chaos. Game development is chaos.
Absolutely. When you come out here and you see Battle for Azeroth and you see Horde Alliance being central to the expansion, do you feel like, all right, I got that one right?
Oh, it chokes me up. I mean, to see how World of Warcraft has evolved over time and to see the cinematics and the fidelity and what it's become and the fans, it gets quite emotional for me.
So one of the coolest things that we're going to show people here today is some of the early Hearthstone concepts that we have to throw it back here. You're talking about this really small group you were a part of, Ben, and how you were working together, and the team had disbanded for a moment. I don't want to get away from that. What happened there? What was that all about?
Well, as I was saying previously, it was really to, as we say, collaborate across the studio and help everybody else get their stuff done. I mean, it is not a case where you have these multiple silos that are unaware of each other and unhelpful towards each other. It is, we are as big a fan of Overwatch and play it every day at lunch on the art team on Hearthstone as we are World of Warcraft, and can't wait to go level our character there. I mean, we're fans of our own games as much as we are helping them to get made. So of course we want to see them get made if we're going to ever have a chance to play them. So, the choice to disband a goodly portion of the team came from a place of like, let's absolutely help these guys and gals get these games out so that we can be a big fan later down the road and get to enjoy the fruits of that labor.
It must be hard, though, to like think of the greater good for Blizzard, knowing that you have this idea that you really want to iterate on and work on. Like, how's the reaction internally to those voices saying, no, you got to do something else?
I don't. It's not a negative one. Again, everybody understood completely. I mean, nobody slammed any doors and walked out or refused to move or anything like that. It was just like, we get it, we understand. I think it came from a place of, we really hope that people will believe in our thing, when it's time and its turn, and we hope that it will have a chance as well. I mean, the team itself, some of this has come up in the past already, but the team itself was really an experiment. When Team 5 was put together, it came from a place of, we at Blizzard are excited about a lot of different game ideas.
Right.
And they come up all the time. Hey, wouldn't it be cool if? How many sentences at Blizzard start like that every day?
Right.
And as a result, Team 5's place was really, hey, let's get together a small, agile group of developers that are generalists at heart, really enjoy the creative process, but can do it in rapidity, and absolutely dive in on these ideas and maybe drill down into a point that within a year, hey, we've got a game that we can kind of polish and stand up. And really, I mean, Kaplan's actually got a really good story about how in that light, Team 5 is kind of a failure. It really, but I mean, it's...
Yeah, when I first heard about Team 5, it was funny because I was kind of the skeptic grousing off to the side. I had never played a collectible card game before. And I thought to myself, I'm like, these are just so niche and nerdy. Like, who's gonna play this? Oh. Like, I know it's terrible to say. I have a really sad loser story of myself. As a kid, I used to collect the Dungeons and Dragons books, and like a lot of my love for fantasy comes from going through those manuals. But I could never get anybody to play Dungeons and Dragons with me.
I'll play now.
Yeah. So to this day, I've never actually played the game. I've only read the rule books and the monster manual. Anyway, so I never played a collectible card game, and I just thought, like, why are we spending time on this? And I was also really frustrated because we were trying to do so much in the studio, and I remember that Eric Dodds was going to be the lead. He was sort of the visionary behind Hearthstone, And I had worked with Eric for years. He was one of my big influences on World of Warcraft, and he was one of the, I mean, Eric was the central designer really on World of Warcraft in the early days that we all looked up to. And I'm thinking, wow, Eric could contribute in such bigger ways, you know, which is ridiculous. That obviously Hearthstone's huge.
But
and
you were looking out for WoW.
What's that?
You were looking out for WoW.
I was looking out for WoW. And it was so, like, to me, it was like this tragedy. Like, we're really going to give up Eric Dodds. And there were the two marching orders of Team 5 was, you're going to stay super small. You're going to be a super small team, which they did. To the day they shipped, they were 15
15 to 17.
People,
Yeah.
17. And then the other one was they were going to ship a game within a year and then make another game and then make another game. And we were in like year 3 or 4, and that's when I started to grouse. And I was like, come on, like, card game, and like they're supposed to be making a game a year, and we're losing all that great Eric Dodds-ness here at Blizzard. And they pulled me into a playtest, and it was just Eric Dodds and Ben Brode, and they had this super ghetto flash PowerPoint that looked nothing like or not, it wasn't a PowerPoint, but it was like a flash demo of the game, and it looked nothing like Hearthstone looks today. It was like totally like 2D flat, like barely sort of functional, but the mechanics, like the whole game engine and game mechanics are exactly what Hearthstone is today. And I remember playing one match against Ben Brode, and he beat me really, really bad because I'd never played card games before. And I instantly saw the magic. Like, even though I lost and I like did dumb things, I was like, oh my God, this is super, super fun. And I just did a 180-degree turn at that moment. I kind of went around because I had been grousing to people around the studio, why are we doing this? And I'm like, actually, I was 100% wrong. Hearthstone is awesome. And to this day, as the guy who never played a collectible card game, I'm super hardcore Hearthstone player. I play it every single day of my life. I play Hearthstone. I love the game. So I was totally wrong about it.
And I think that's a good point, and Alan's already touched on it, and Kaplan's touched on it, is what makes a really good developer, what makes a game developer able to show up to their job every day and do a good job at it, is that open-mindedness and that ability to be agile in one's own head, not just what they're doing on the game day to day, but in one's own head, be able to see things objectively, hear people out, even though it may be the same argument or a very similar argument to what you've been hearing for something you don't agree with, and then hear it that 4th or 5th time and think to yourself, if that's the 4th or 5th time I'm hearing it, maybe there's something there. Maybe I need to reassess this. All the time we're asked as creatives, I wouldn't even say game developers, as a creative, you are asked to disown children that you have brought up in your own head as this is the idea, this is going to be the one, this is going to be the defining moment. And then within a year's time, you're fighting against it and hoping that it never actually happens because you've seen the truth of where actually by taking it somewhere different, it's better still. And I have a real hard time thinking, this is why I don't believe in the singularity of genius individuals. Mm-hmm. I don't think genius comes in individual packages at all. I think it comes from collective groups. Now, maybe the genius of an individual is the gathering of that group, but if that individual is not willing or able to listen to that group and react accordingly, it has very little hope in the end, ultimately. And I think that Blizzard has excelled in that year after year for in excess of 25 years at this point.
Yeah.
Do you find that it was difficult to kind of instill a culture at Blizzard on the various teams that you work on, that you're willing to fail, that you're willing to try ideas and be able to say, you know what, this one's going to be a flop, let's not do this?
Hearthstone is a clearinghouse of bad ideas. We've got bad ideas for our bad ideas. And I think a lot of that came out in the culture of the team because of the individuals we've got on the team. There's a snarkiness and a kind of fun, we say tongue-in-cheek, epically charming, like these are all bywords that we use for the game. But they really define the team, too. They could describe any number of individuals on that team as well as they do the game. You see our humor show up in that game all the time. It's very irreverent. It's very self-effacing. There really aren't any egos on the team that push for ideas or much less come into the form of these games trying to be bigger or greater than what they really actually are. They're a return to the 3rd click or 4th click on the minion in Warcraft 3 and hear the funny saying that breaks the 4th wall but gets me to chuckle. You know, it's those kind of moments that we're wanting to celebrate and let others take the world-saving, darkness must fall, we must save the world again type of moments. And those kind of, hey guys, let's have a bad idea, let's figure out what this is, let's make it a better idea. People are like rushing to raise their hand. It's not a case where in some meetings you get the, gosh, I don't want to speak up first because people are not going to listen to my next idea based on how bad this one I think might be. And we've got directors across all boards going, guys, this is an awful idea and we should absolutely not do this. And it's not a humble brag. Don't do this, please. But here's this thing. And then somebody else goes, yeah, that's pretty awful. I can top that, though. And then they'll introduce another one. And by the third or fourth round of the table, somebody's like, but, and then you start to get different adjoining words coming into the conversation. And you end up with these moments where you're like, wow, I was a part of that conversation. It was really a cool thing to see happen. So
that process of throwing out like half-baked design ideas and making it safe in a brainstorm to do that, I think is super, super valuable. And so otherwise everybody turtles up and waits until they have a perfect idea, and you don't get that same kind of that interplay back and forth. And then in the early days, back when we started, it took a year to make a game. And so we would try all kinds of crazy ideas, and if they didn't work, cancel them. And even encapsulated that in one of our little cute Blizzard witticisms, we'd say, don't be afraid to kill your babies, which meant you may have worked on this thing for a year, and if it doesn't work, then throw it away and try something else. And it might be an individual idea, it might be a whole product, but that's like part of the course for Blizzard's culture, is to boldly try a bunch of crazy things, knowing that we're going to throw half of it away. And I think that makes us pretty different than most other companies out there that don't embrace that process.
I think when you're what's really interesting in these conversations where people are throwing out all sorts of crazy ideas, it's super easy to explain why an idea won't work or to kill an idea. It's super easy to go, well, clearly like the game mechanics behind that or the fantasy behind that is flawed, and let me be super smart and tell you why those things won't work. But I think the real difference and what we look for in Blizzard creators is the ability to go, yeah, that is kind of a crazy idea, but here's how we could make that work. And it's a really different way of coming at a brainstorming session. I would suggest anybody in whatever industry or field you're in really try that. Like, rather than shutting the people down who are around you all the time, like just take a moment and go, wow, I think I just heard the most ridiculously awful thing ever, but let me just go with it. Like, let's just go with it and say that I'm fully committed to making that thing work, and then how great could that really be?
It's like a Ben Brode's improv technique he talked about, like yes, but, instead of shutting someone down, okay, here's something else to consider. Could you maybe point to something along the Overwatch development cycle that you were thinking of, hey, this was a good idea at first, but, when the fans saw it, when the players got to play with it, yeah, we should have rethought that one.
We, I think the evolution of Winston was along those lines of...
His bubble?
Not just his bubble, but like the fact, should we have a talking gorilla in the game? Like
who doesn't want that?
I know, but
Crazy.
I mean that's like but you would be surprised when we started making this hero-based shooter universe. We're like, hey, we want it to take place in the future, and we want it to be super heroic and really cool. And then Arnold draws Winston, and we love the art. And a lot of people had that first instinct of like, but wait, we were talking about like these superheroes, and is that monkey really a superhero? And I think it was the people who looked at it and went, wait a second, we could create a universe where Winston is actually one of the biggest heroes and one of the most important heroes in the game. And what tone does that universe have to take then? Like, how is it different from other hero universes that it can include this kind of, ridiculous character concept that might seem really out of place otherwise?
But really, it's the cast that so many people have gravitated to for Overwatch. It's this really unique, diverse cast that really is unlike anything anyone has ever experienced, at least in gaming.
I have another example, too, a more hardcore example. That's like a touchy-feely, like subjective example, but our hardcore, like super hardcore competitive esport Overwatch community will relate with this. In the early days of competitive Overwatch, a lot of the competitive scene wanted us to do a system that, what was it called? Stopwatch. They wanted stopwatch, which was you let one team play out as much as they could, and the other team had to beat the other team within the allotted time. And there were all these design flaws that we saw as a team in Stopwatch. And so the Overwatch team was very resistant to adopting Stopwatch as like a sort of our core mode. And I remember we have this really brilliant gameplay engineer on the Overwatch team named Dan Reed. He worked on World of Warcraft, and he came from Swinging Ape before when we acquired Swinging Ape. And he was in our office as we were having this debate over why we didn't like Stopwatch. And Dan Reed just sort of came into the room at that moment and said, well, why don't you do X, Y, and Z? And basically what he was doing is he fully laid out the design for what has now become Time Bank and is now what competitive Overwatch uses to this day, which was he didn't totally dismiss some of the core goals of what Stopwatch was trying to achieve, but he put a much more refined design on top of it. And it was really funny because Dan did it in like 5 minutes. He's like, you could just, X, Y, and Z, and explained exactly how Time Bank walked, and then just walked out of the office. And then all the game designers who were supposed to be figuring the thing out, we kind of looked and were like, okay, we're just going to do Dan's idea, and hopefully it'll work out.
Just drop the mic on you.
Yeah.
Ben, can you think of an idea that perhaps a first iteration that you tried to implement in Hearthstone that you're like, man, this was a cool idea, but we can't do this?
I can do two very briefly. The first one was probably, I was the biggest advocate for anything but cards in the collectible game. I was wildly against them. I think I came from a background of doing a lot of art for cards and collectible games out in the industry. I spent a lot of time as an art director for also the same. So I think it wasn't coming from a personal place, but rather a, let's be avant-garde, let's be next gen, how are we going to do this? Let's get rid of cards. And Dodds and Broad kind of looked at me with this, you poor sap. You're like, you've been here 6 weeks. The only reason you're going to get to do this is because of that year, right? And we're going to let you get this out of your system. So I think they humored me, which I appreciate now. At the time, I didn't recognize it as that. I think they were in awe. That's what I'd like to think. Wow, this guy's going to just change this whole thing. Sadly, no. But I did spend a couple months of like, let's try something different. You've seen some of these come up here. It's the Dark Moon Fair themed board where this thing's a moon well over here, and this gadget one is the gnome one, and oh my gosh, the mage one is like a vial of magic, and you throw it down and smash it. And this, I fully painted out all these different things and kept pitching it. And what we ended up with at the end of the day was, what do any of these things do? Like I see what class it belongs to. I don't know if that one's more powerful than this one. I don't know how much more, like what's the level of power in it? Is it a legendary? Is it an epic? If we wanted, that's the one right there, actually, that's up on the screen now. You started to gain a lot of flavor, but at the cost of the consistency of the thing, and it didn't stand up on its own. So I initially begrudgingly said, okay, I'll try some of those cards for you, and those will come up here in a minute too, where there's 3 of them side by side. So I started to try different card shapes, but still make them a little bit different still. And it started to come around with, common language is everything. And if there's a pre-stated language for a thing, we understand everything there is to about cards. We know how to deal, we know how to shuffle, we know what a mulligan is. There's the cards right there. We know the language that comes with playing a card game. And there was a whole lot of education that we just got to skip right to the end to then introduce the new ideas that we were really passionate about and wanted to bring to that system. So thankfully, I was able to back away from the problem, and Dodds and Broad patiently helped me understand, why I was ultimately wrong in that assumption. Secondly would be, there's another one coming up here where we have a board that looks like it's got a bunch of crap coming at it and kind of stabbing things on the board and whatnot. Initially, I pitched an idea for, what if the minions aren't actually the advocates of damage for all the other things on the board, but rather it's the board itself. So by this minion attacking this minion, it kills it, but there's like a spike that comes out and kind of grabs it and pulls it in the board, or a flamethrower comes up and hits the thing and goes away. So the board really became a major player in the game. Dodds was ultimately not a huge fan of this, and we talked a lot about it, about what was his wants for it. He tried to understand what my wants were for it, to Kaplan's point of, he didn't shoot it down outright. He stated his points on it, and I stated mine, and ultimately where we landed was, the board is a place, and certainly we want it to be charming and inspiring and interesting to set a vibe and a feel. But the stars of this really need to be the collectibles. The cards and the minions and the tokens that they become on the board have to be the stars. Anything else is secondary. Co-stars can't be stepping all over them and doing their own thing. It really has to get down to what are the things we want the players feeling most valued in their collection? What are the things they have to really stake their passion on? And that's where we landed on a board that is a place and an environment, but nothing more.
I think we all really appreciate you being willing to share stories about what goes on behind the scenes and some of our failures, but I'd really like to open up to some Q&A.
Sure.
I'm sure some of us might have some questions, right? Let's see here. Can we go over here with the first question? Not yet? All right. So while we wait for some Q&A, I'd actually like to ask one more. So if you had to pick one moment, one defining moment from development where you had to learn a lesson, one tough lesson, that carried forth into your future, what would you say it was?
So for me, it's a very clear lesson from our early days. I tell this story a lot at Blizzard. We had made this game called The Lost Vikings. It went on to become Puzzle Game of the Year. And
You don't play Lost Vikings?
it's old school. There may not be too many.
The three of us.
Super Nintendo game. And it was one of our first original developments. And when it came out, we had heard that the local Virgin Megastore had some kiosks set up showing the game. And so we rushed down there at lunchtime and stood back. And I watched as this probably about 14 years old, walked over, picked up the controller. It was the very, very first level of the game. And we were trying to teach players the jump ability. And it was as simple as could be. You hit the A key, your guy would jump over, and there was a little pit of electricity, trivially easy to jump over. And he took 2 steps to the right, fell into the pit of electricity, got electrocuted, put the controller down, and walked to the next game, which was not Lost Vikings.
No, come back here, right?
We wanted to rush over there and go, no, come back, give it another try. This is how you do it. And for me, that was a foundational kind of moment. And you see the lessons from that carried through in everything we do in various forms, which is try to make the player feel special and heroic and smart right from the beginning. And don't kill them right away. And you see it in StarCraft, where the computer won't attack you, and the tech tree is very simple early on. Or you see it in World of Warcraft, where creatures won't aggro you, and rather than starting you in Stormwind, we start you off in this quiet little corner so you're not overwhelmed. And that, let the player feel heroic right from the beginning. It started from that exact moment. So that clear lesson, defining for us.
Easy to learn, difficult to master. That kind of carries forth
That
into
too.
all our games.
That's right.
We have some questions here. I want to make sure to get to some Q&A. Let's start over here with the first question.
Hey, my name is Zach, and I just had a question about World of Warcraft. In that, in the early days, it was kind of, you just made the zone and then you'd open the quests in it and whatnot. But more recently, you go into a zone and you follow a story and usually a character in an event. So my question is, for the most part, do you create a zone and you have like a good idea, like I want to make an awesome like underground forest or something, and then fill it with events and characters? Or do you have an event and character in mind and then you create the zone around them?
Well, I think that's a killer question, and it's almost a better question for the current WoW team.
Yeah.
So the last time I worked on World of Warcraft was in 2008. But in the old days, we used to focus on creating the world as a character. Chris Metzen used to actually say way back in the day that the main character of World of Warcraft is the world. And I thought that was really cool. And we went for a vibe to every single zone. But if you look back on vanilla, there wasn't really a contiguous storyline that really carried everybody through. And I think you can follow the WoW team's evolution, at least in the days that I was involved, through Burning Crusade, where we tried to do a lot more linear storytelling, but we got a little lost. And we did things like Illidan was not super accessible by most of the player base. So even though there was this really cool character and you wanted to follow the storyline of the Burning Crusade through, if you weren't a raid-capable guild doing Black Temple, you weren't ever going to get that story. And I think where the WoW team really turned a huge corner was with Wrath of the Lich King. And in particular, it was the Death Knight starting experience that Alex Afrasiabi did, where we sort of changed the game now from being this like world and vibe sort of focused storytelling to really going for a character arc and a story arc that was going to span an entire expansion. And I remember Alex and Chris Metzen really working on that Wrath of the Lich King like story that was gonna, it had its midpoint at the Wrath Gate, if you guys remember. It had the awesome opening that took place in the Death Knight starting area where you instantly, like right away, were talking to Arthas, and then eventually culminated with the fall of the Lich King at the end of the patch cycle. And if you look at where World of Warcraft is now, like I think Legion was almost like a masterpiece in storytelling, and I think a lot of that is the credit of the WoW team, how they've evolved over the years, and guys like Alex Afrasiabi, who's been on that team and helping to guide the vision and guide the storytelling for so many years, that, you know, Warcraft is really in good hands with people like Team 2 and Alex.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Next
Hey guys, thank you so much for the presentation. Really love the insider's look. So I have a question regarding the EverQuest mentioned earlier. So a huge fan of this game myself. And Alan, it was my first time MMO. So Alan, you mentioned you were an ogre warrior, and Jeff, I was wondering which race and class you were playing that back in the day.
I played a halfling rogue, and it was fine that people just call me the hero of Rivervale, because that's who I was. Never hero of Rivervale.
I love it.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome. Over here on the left, next question.
Hey, my name's Aiden. Sorry, I kind of written down. So since Blizzard games have been part of the upper echelon of esports, whether intentional or not, how do you feel the company's design goals have been able to accept competitive gaming and kind of take it in stride with all your projects?
Esports.
Also, from a Hearthstone perspective, esports are super important. I think the fact that Hearthstone came out and Twitch immediately picked it up the way it did, and you started getting a lot of streaming behind it, which meant you got a lot of people watching the game, and that leads directly into more of an esports type of setting where it has to be a very watchable game while also a very playable game, was not lost on us. And that was something that we were very cognizant of and aware of. At the same time, we never wanted to lose sight of the fact that we didn't want to be making a game for esports solely. Like, that was not the kind of game we wanted to do either. We wanted to see one that could exist in both realms. You know, you get your casual, your mid-level, and your hardcore players, and then ultimately even past what I would call a hardcore, that's the more esports side of things too, where it's truly competitive play at a high level. All of those parts or sides within a game need to be adhered to and addressed to. And it's something we've taken very seriously through Hearthstone to this day. Always, and the cross-section that Jeff mentioned actually exists on Hearthstone too. I'd say probably go out on a limb and say it exists on every team. But on Hearthstone, that's no different. We've got our casual, we've got our mid-level, we've got our super hardcore. I am no Ben Brode. I am never going to win games the way those guys do. You know, Mr. Dene is a wonderful player. I've made it to 15 once, and I tried really hard to get there, and it was in the first 6 weeks, so I probably couldn't do that again very easily. I represent a very equal subset there, and my voice in those meetings is as interesting for those wanting to make a well-rounded game as Mr. Dene's is. So we take it very seriously, but we also realize there is a broadness there that we want to take advantage of as well.
Alan, you were here for like what many believe is the birth of esports with StarCraft. You know? What was that like when you saw this brand new thing arise out of video games?
Yeah, so we never had any idea what StarCraft would become. It surprised us as much as I think it surprised the world. But kind of echoing what Ben said, we don't approach game making with esports necessarily in mind. One of our pillar design values is easy to learn, difficult to master. And it encapsulates this aspiration that our games would be simple enough that a 10-year-old could pick it up and play it after 5 minutes, and then spend the rest of their life enjoying it and playing it. That takes the form very commonly of player versus player in order to make a game, you know, competitive and replayable for many years. And so StarCraft was just our recognition that playing competitive games is really, really fun. Back in the days, it was Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter. And if you really want to distill it down to kind of the pure essence of design, you could look at a game like chess as almost the perfect canonical example a game that's very simple to describe, but then you could spend the rest of your life learning to master it. So games to be great don't have to be complex. We try to do that in everything we do, and then you see it in Hearthstone today, you see it in Overwatch today, where they're very easy to pick up and play, but then you can play at very high competitive levels. And esports is almost a happy side effect of what we've done for many, many years.
And it has turned into this massive industry with pros and
Yeah.
scene behind it. Maybe, Jeff, your vision of the growth of esports and how it's affected Overwatch.
Well, I mean, the coolest part about esports to me is when you introduce somebody who previously has either never shown interest in esports or is literally skeptical of it. You know, like, why are they doing any of that esports stuff? And then you watch a match, like, I don't know if anybody watched South Korea versus USA last night, but that was one of the craziest, most awesome experiences ever. And there's so many people who have never watched esports before see a match like that, and it suddenly clicks and they get it. They're like, wow, not only is playing games really fun, but watching games played at the highest level is super fun. I mean, there's a lot of that even going on in the streamer culture, which is not necessarily competitive, but just watching people play games can be really, really fun and compelling. I think back to the early days. I was the youngest of three brothers, so I spent a lot of time on the couch watching the two older brothers, have the controller, but it was fun to watch people play and watch people play competitively, and there's people who are better than us at playing games. So I think it's awesome to be celebrated and should be exposed to a lot of different people. Now, I don't think you should sacrifice the integrity or the fun or the approachability of the game at the expense of just making it purely an esport. I don't think you can have a great esport without an awesome, broad, accessible game that people can see themselves playing someday. The two go hand in hand. It's not these competing sides of casual versus hardcore. We want a great game experience that everybody can enjoy.
That's all the time we have today, guys. Let's give a round of applause to our three panelists. Thank you so much for sharing these stories. Everyone have a great BlizzCon.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Guys.
Thank you for attending the Behind Blizzard's Worlds panel. Up next, Heroes of the